Hey everyone. So I want to go through the people who were booted really early in their seasons, mainly the pre-jury portion, but showed a lot of potential throughout their short time in their seasons to be a good player, went home due to circumstances out of control, or would most likely thrive in several other seasons and other scenarios. Pre-jurors are generally seen as bad players, and a lot of them are seen as that for good reason. But there are some that were becoming good players or had their light dimmed early. Like the other recent videos I have done, I am not including BB Can, BB2, BB3, or the spin off seasons, so it's from BB4 onwards. So I'm going to place one person from each pre jury season and talk about how I think they could have done better in a different season and why I think they had potential. So for Big Brother 4, I have David. He was in an alliance of 8 with all of the OGs, and he was in a good position within the alliance, though it was clear that he was closest to the oldest members, Jack and Erica. He won the veto in the second week and wanted to use it on his ex Michelle, but that was rejected by the HOH. Dana ends up winning HOH, and he was safe until Nathan decides to use the veto on the target Allison. And even while he was nominated, he was able to get a few votes, and the Stooges were considering keeping him. I think his fault was that he poorly pretended to be dumb and was seen as a bit irrational, and was the shield for his two closest allies. Despite Dana's HOH being a roller coaster that put him in a bad decision for reasons that really weren't of his own. For Big Brother 5, I have Laurie, and she's a weird one. Of course, she took the $10,000, and that pissed people off, but that was a new twist, and that didn't really seem to affect her game much at all. She managed to get into a solid majority alliance, which was the Pinky Alliance, and she was good in competitions from the few competitions she did compete in during her 2 weeks in the house. When she was nominated, she was staying with Holly beside her, and she was close to winning the veto, but Jace, the one person who would use the veto on Holly, won it, and he did smartly use it. And this was during the time where it was still rare for people to use the veto on nominees, and the few who did were shamed for it. Her main weakness was that she could not hide her threat level, as all of the guys saw that she was a threat, and she went back and forth about whether she wanted to stay or not, which showed that she didn't have the killer instinct. So for Big Brother 6, I put Sarah. I was actually thinking about putting Eric here instead, but I decided to go with Sarah, since she didn't really do much that caused her own eviction, where Eric did. As we all know, Sarah was not even supposed to be on the season, and was a last minute addition because James's original partner dropped out. So, Sarah is not a great player, and I will admit that, but she really didn't make many, if any, mistakes compared to the other pre-jurors. She's a nice, inoffensive woman who gets along with virtually everyone in the season, and everyone saw her as a harmless victim. At the same time, this made her very expendable to her own alliance, and I think that's what her major flaw is. When James was nominated in weeks 3 and 4, she was never nominated beside him, and her ally Hallie won HOH, when she should have been safe. James's overplaying came back, and her ally nominated her beside James. And the veto competition was specifically designed in a way where the target would win, which we saw in Big Brother 5 when James won the same competition. So that screwed her even more. I doubt she would have been targeted if James left before her. For Big Brother 7, I put the king of pre-juries himself, Kaser. I was going to add Diane instead, but I decided against it and went with Kaser. Out of his 3 games, this one is his best, though that clearly doesn't say much, and he made the least mistakes here. Of course, he did get in the bad side of Chilltown, as he overestimated his own skill set as a player and was lucky that his alliance won the first 4 HOHs. But during this time, everyone was annoyed with Janelle and Howie the most, and it didn't even seem like anyone wanted to actively target him. When Danielle won HOH, he wasn't even on her radar, hence him not being nominated. Janelle was the target that week, so his chances of making jury seemed good at this point, but she won the POV, though he rejected her offer to play, which would have brought them both to jury, most likely, and he was evicted on his birthday. He wasn't as sloppy as the other pre-jurors of the season, so he is here. So for Big Brother 8, I put Nick. So I was thinking about Big Brother 8, and the pre-jurors were very underwhelming, even more than usual. I think the only one that showed so much promise was Nick, and the fact that he actually had a good social game, most of the house liked him, and they all felt bad about getting rid of him. He was athletic, but I don't remember him doing well in any specific competition. And he outright stated that he didn't care to win, and he wasn't lying about it, like Hardy was in Big Brother 2. Honestly, he just didn't screw up or was as poor as all the other pre-jurors. And I do think if the Hinky vote mess didn't happen, he could have lasted a bit longer and maybe started eventually winning competition. His big downfall was being too glued on Danielle when he had the social game to let that thrive for him on his own, but he just became a bit too exclusive with his showmance. For Big Brother 9, I decided to go with Alex. So it is seen in the community that Alex was completely robbed and he would have dominated the game if he wasn't partnered with Amanda. I don't know if I will go that far since he was very hot tempered, didn't make very good moves like targeting Jenna and Parker, and needed to communicate with his partner a lot better. But out of the pre-jurors, he definitely did the least out of everyone to cause their own evictions, and he definitely had promise. He was close to Matt and Natalie and built solid relationships with everyone else to the point of feeling bad for him and blaming everything on Amanda. I was thinking about putting Parker on this list, but I think Parker was a bit more vocal compared to Alex, and I think he didn't have as good social skills, which is why I chose Alex instead. So in Big Brother 10, I'm choosing Angie. I am going back and forth on a few people for this one, which says a lot, since I was considering 3 of them to represent this season, and there are only 4 pre-jurors. This means that I think BB10 has the strongest pre-jurors when it comes to gameplay potential and from what they've shown. Ultimately, I went with Angie because I feel like the others caused their evictions more than she did. Of course, she tried to help Brian flip the house in week 1, which ended up failing and caused the other girls to be mad at her. But she kind of hid in the distance from all of the drama, which even Keisha would admit. She ended up getting into a part of the 8-person alliance despite this and became allies with Michelle, Memphis, and Jesse. I don't think she is great or anything, but there was definitely a lot of jealousy from the girls, specifically Keisha, which ended up getting her out of the house. For Big Brother 11, I ended up choosing Ronnie, and I didn't think I was going to choose him with his reputation of being one of the worst players ever. So it was hard for me to choose one person. Of course, Brayden had his back door, and the racism that came out of his mouth because he didn't get the game instantly nixed him off for me. Ronnie turning on Laura, but she really wasn't good socially to begin with and was on next door in the game, essentially. And Casey was almost targeted week 1 and then broke a promise to Jesse and Natalie, which caused for them to target him 2 weeks later. I am shocked that I'm choosing Ronnie as the pre-juror who is the best from his season. As we saw from the first 1 to 2 weeks, he was able to play both sides relatively well, but he made the mistake of winning HOH, causing for that to be completely blown up. Despite all of that, he had a solid alliance with the Brains and the Bronze, which rode hard for him, which doesn't happen for many people who have done what Ronnie did in Big Brother, and he still almost stayed in week 4. Honestly, he's only here because I think the pre-jurors are very poor players in the season, but he was the most strategic out of all of them, and I do think he would do better on another season compared to the other 3. For Big Brother 12, I'm choosing Kristen, and it's interesting how kind of underrated she is as a player. Of course, he had some of the girls who felt weirdly about her at first, but she seemed to be the most proactive out of the girls with making alliances and trying to be social with everyone, at least in the beginning. No one was really targeting her for the first few weeks, and the brigade had solid relationships with her, to the point where they weren't even planning on targeting her anytime soon. She was also close with the outsiders and wasn't even on Brentel's radar. I think her being close with the outsiders like Andrew kind of blew back in her face, because when they were on their way home or returned on, they were of course going to lash out at her more than anyone else, which ended up being her undoing, which Rachel used as an excuse to target her. She was very perceptive and was one of the few people to realize that there was a guys' alliance happening, and she didn't need assistance in figuring it out. She definitely had more potential than the other 3 pre-jurors in the season. So for Big Brother 13, I am choosing Dominic, and I feel like this one's obvious. While it was a good idea to form a newbie alliance, it never works on these type of shows due to production blatantly being in the favor of the vets, and some of the newbies are so starstruck with the vets, so they will gravitate towards the vets, and newbies in general lack experience. Of course, all of his allies, including himself, were eliminated in the pre-jury portion, but I felt like he integrated with the vets better than the others who were eliminated, as Keith and Cassie made several mistakes. The vets were thinking about keeping him over Adam, but Danielle's overplaying caused for them to evict him instead, which they did admit, to the point where they almost kind of felt sorry for him. He was decent in competitions, was good socially, and he was the fave to come back, but a lot of the twists were simply against him in that season. So from Big Brother 14, I'm choosing Kara. Kara is a very weird one to talk about, hence why most people don't talk about her in general regarding Big Brother. I don't think Kara was a great player or had the potential to be one, but she really did nothing wrong to cause her eviction. I wanted to put Jody here, but I had no idea what she was like in the house, and the day one situation is definitely just another beast, since you don't have time to get to know the others and to have a normal BB week play out. Kara was nominated because the HOH wanted Dan's best teammate and Boogie's best teammate to go against one another, so that was literally out of her control. The vote between her and Frank flipped back and forth like 100 times, and then she was booted because the house hated Willie, though they liked her, and they also wanted to weaken Dan. Literally everything about her game had very little to do with her, but was about others, and the circumstances around her eviction is just so odd, hence why she's on this list. From what we saw, she didn't do anything poorly, especially compared to the other pre-jurors of her season. So for Big Brother 15, I was thinking about putting Nick on here, but I decided to go with Caitlyn. In general, I always forget about Caitlyn, and most people do when discussing Big Brother 15. Like I said earlier, I was going to put Nick on here, but I remember how overrated he was, and he benefited from having a huge edit in the first 2 weeks. He didn't speak to most of the house, and it was why they found it so easy to boot him in the second week, and that alliance was weak as hell to begin with. Out of her, Gina Marie, and Aaron, she was definitely the most rational person and performed better in competitions than they did, and actually knew how to campaign, which apparently almost worked during her boot week. She got along better with some of the outsiders compared to some of her allies, and I feel like if she was in another season, she would do a lot better, which I can't say for most of the other pre-jurors in her season. So Big Brother 16 is an easy choice for me, and I'm going with Amber. 7 years later, and I still don't see why Christine felt the need to turn on Amber, and for the detonators to humiliate her while sending her home. For some weird reason, a lot of people did not trust her, despite her being nice to everyone, and was getting along with some people at times throughout the seasons. The reason is most likely misogynoir. She was good in competitions and had a decent enough strategic read on the house, especially with the people that were in her cast in comparison. Her downfall came to be because the house used her not being interested in Caleb as a rationale to get her out of the house, knowing that she made her feelings known, and Christine told the guys that Amber was thinking about getting rid of some guys, since she made the correct read of a lot of the girls being nominated and evicted. At the same time, she was a bit too passive strategically, despite some decent reads here and there, but she's here because her eviction was a lot more faultless on her part compared to the others on her season. Being the last pre-juror also gives her a lot more favor on this list, and simply put, she showed more potential compared to the other 4 pre-jurors, and she would most likely do better on another season, which I can't say for the other 4. For Big Brother 17, I ended up going with Clay. I went back and forth with him and Jeff, who I had as an honorable mention, but I went with Clay because he went further, and we have a lot more information on what he could do. He played more in power while Jeff played out of power, but I think they both have a lot of potential. Essentially, if you got into an argument with Clay, you ended up getting sent home swiftly, as we saw this with Davon and Audrey, so he clearly had a lot of sway on his side, especially earlier on in the season. He had a good social game, and almost everyone in the house liked him and wanted to get on his good side. Level 6 was a strong alliance, and his opinion was relatively respected. Faults of his was that he was too willing to go on the block several times and to, quote unquote, take the sword for people. But I feel like he did that because he didn't want to be in sequester for his boot week and is way too confrontational on his own, and isn't a great liar, which bit him in the butt during the Jason scenario and the mess he caused on his eviction day. So, from Big Brother 18, this is a weak choice, but I'm going with Bronte. If I was not forcing myself to choose one person from each season, no one from Big Brother 18 would make it on. Jose, Frank, and Tiffany caused their own eliminations with their poor gameplay on multiple levels, and while Glenn was eliminated due to the stupid Day 1 twist, I don't see him faring well with this cast or many other casts. And with Victor returning, I have to go with Bronte. With this in mind, I don't think she's a good player at all or anything, but she's here because her eviction wasn't really her fault. Due to a twist, she ends up going on the block on her closest ally's HOH and was still a pawn for most of that week, but a last-minute flip, where I do think some DR influence was involved, caused for her to be voted out instead of Tiffany. At the same time, she was very expendable to everyone in the house, and that is a dangerous position to be in. And she was still in the minority alliance during the entire time. She also was not a good player socially or strategically, but she was really faultless in her eviction here. So, from Big Brother 19, I am going with Dominique. Big Brother 19 is another season where I don't really feel like the pre-jurors showed a lot of promise or potential to do better under another circumstance. Cameron was robbed from the stupid Day 1 twist, but just from the little we saw of him, his social skills were not great and was a lot more awkward than necessary to make it throughout the house. Ramses was too quiet, alienated, and came off as shifty at times, and I do not need to get into how horrendous Jessica was, despite all the opportunities given to her. Anyways, I'm putting Dominique on the list, since she did find herself in a good position within the majority for the first few weeks, and while Jillian did go home due to a bunch of bad circumstances, and Cody being a horrible HOH, I think Dominique has more potential as a player if she was on another season. Before Paul turned on her for no reason, Dominique was good socially and was getting the hang of the game, but when she was targeted, she just completely flatlined and folded, so here she is. So for Big Brother 20, I'm going with Swaggy. This choice for me was relatively easy, and I'm going with him. It is weird choosing a second boot, but he actually showed some potential that many other second boots didn't have. He was in a solid alliance during his entire time throughout the season, and they didn't turn on him, outside of Caitlyn. Most second boots are not able to accomplish this. He clearly has a mind for the game and understands the game, but I think his major fault was being too trusting, especially towards Tyler, and could not hide his threat level down whatsoever, since he was too cocky and likes to brag about everything. Compared to Caitlyn, Winston, and Rachel, where none of them had strategic chops, all had poor social games, even within their own alliances, and Steve just being a person that was cast, he was an easy choice for me. From Big Brother 21, I am choosing Sam. Honestly, I found him to be one of the most forgettable people to ever take part in Big Brother, and I'm struggling to remember his journey through the house. But he didn't have to deal with all the microaggressions that people like Ovi and Kimmy did, for obvious reasons, and while that was happening, they just in general lacked the social skills needed to thrive in Big Brother. Bella was just horrible all around and actively ruined her somewhat decent position within everyone in the house for no reason, so I have no choice but to choose him. David was also booted due to a Day 1 twist. So, from what I looked up, he did win 2 vetoes, so he was good in competitions, and during his boot week, he wasn't even the target, but the target, Nick, won veto, and Catherine was very, very, very close to going home, to the point where even Julie didn't know who was going at the live show. but that had more to do with the Majority Alliance imploding itself than anything Sam did to save himself. So for Big Brother 22, my choice is Bailey. My choice out of the pre-jurors to put on this list from this season was very easy, and Bailey was the obvious choice for me. One, she was the only person that many of the members of the Majority Alliance wanted to work with and have some solid relationships with them, to the point where some of them wanted to bring her in the committee. But Danielle was the person who shot it down since she was attached to Devon, so that was squashed. She was close to people like Janelle and Kaser, but then threw them away because Devon told her to, and Bailey never handles things well when she's targeted or when things don't go her way. Ultimately, she goes home pre-jury mainly because the house guests saw her as a better juror in Big Brother 20 compared to Devon in Big Brother 18, and they didn't want her to do the same thing again in this season. So her being easily angered and emotional was used against her, despite being a lot calmer this season. So that's my quick little list of a pre-juror per each season who had a lot more potential to do better under a different circumstance. I am planning on making my early to mid jury section ranking video within the next week or two, since we are heading closer to the end game of Big Brother 23, and then I will do the end game rankings for those seasons. So, thank you all for watching, and I'll be back soon.